right, so thanks for joining us this evening. We're here with Glenn Jensen, and he's running for the 50th District of California for the House of Representatives. That being said, I'm here with the Independent Progressive. My name is Amanda Cumming. I'm here with John Rizzo as well as Aaron Albritton. So in an effort to enhance accessibility to our congressional leaders, we have some questions for you. And these are questions that we feel are important. However, if there are any additional questions that you feel are important, we want you to stay engaged and stay involved in the political process. So please feel free to comment below. We will also have some additional links for you to go to access not only our website at theindependentprogressive.com, but also Glenn's website at votejensen.com. So we want you to stay connected, stay involved, and stay excited. That being said, are you ready to go ahead and do this?
You bet, Amanda. And thank you so much for hosting this event this evening. Look forward to our dialogue.
Fantastic. So first off, why don't you tell our audience a bit about yourself? So for instance, how did you get to where you are today?
Well, I am a lifelong congressional District 50 resident. I was born in the district. My wife was born in the district. We've raised our kids in the district. We care about people here. And after the election this past November, it became very, very obvious to me that it was time for me to get actively involved. I had worked with with Al Gore when he was in the Senate on some grassroots efforts. I was also the speaking voice for John Edwards during his campaign. But now, as I near the end of my professional career, I have the time, I have the ambition to compete for this seat. But I think I also bring the right set of skills to be able to speak to both Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And one of the things that I characterize myself as is a recovering Republican. Now, I started that journey 38 years ago when Iran-Contra happened, which I consider obviously one of the biggest scandals in U.S. history. But that changed me, and it changed me to take a position of understanding that what we're all about here is promoting opportunity for the district that aligns with national security, fiscal accountability, as well as justice. And so that's what really drove me. This is the right point in time. In addition, my congressman, my opponent has actually, he's under investigation by the Department of Justice for taking about $60,000 out of his campaign financing. And I know we'll probably have a question about that in the future, but that is completely dishonest. And if there's any, won't meet with his constituents. So I hope to bring a positive change. I can't be bought by anybody. I don't have anything to prove, and I don't have a long-term interest in being a lifer in the Congress. I want to make a difference, just like our Constitution and our founders had intended, and then get out and and free up a space for somebody else on the bench in a few years.
Okay, so you mentioned Iran-Contra as kind of the kind of impetus for kind of making your decisions change. Could you kind of expand upon that? Why was it that particular event? What was it about?
Well, I was having several challenges. It was towards the end of my, it was actually right after the end of my college career, and I had dealt with some of the changes that then Governor Reagan instilled upon us in California, impact to our University of California system, which at one time was the world's best education system at the at the collegiate level. And so I was protesting then, but what Iran-Contra did is it opened my eyes, and that is that I discovered that things like patriotism and personal responsibility and accountability were not Republican values, they're American values. And what was particularly disturbing about that was the whole notion that there could be a cover-up, there could be an involvement from top down to a colonel from the U.S. Marine Corps shredding evidence. And that to me was unconscionable. So, that's what then and there when I made my change, and I aligned much nicer, I think, with the goals and objectives of the Democratic Party at that point. I was raised in a Republican family, and I think much like religion, you kind of start out where the religion you started in, well, that's where I started out, and then I grew up. And when I grew up, I made some decisions.
It makes total sense from where I'm sitting at any ways. Now, I've got some more questions for you let's see. So you mentioned earlier to me, at least, and I want you to be able to expand upon it and for people to know, but where do you sit on healthcare? Now, we have a big debate going on in the country currently about kind of the ACA and the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, as I'm sure you're well informed of. That being the case, what has the ACA done for your district, if you're aware? And also, how do you feel about it being repealed? And what would you do to maybe improve upon that?
So that's a multi-part question, and let's take each part on at a time. First, the ACA established a baseline of healthcare coverage that one would consider as just that, a standard set of goods and services that everybody would enjoy. And by the way, the things that were established under the ACA translated not only to publicly funded healthcare, but also it translated to private private healthcare in businesses and so on. Things like lifetime caps were eliminated. Things like pre-existing conditions were eliminated. In addition, the ACA brought coverage and Medicaid expansion to states like Tennessee, where you're at, where for the first time ever, families actually had healthcare coverage. And let's not kid ourselves. The ACA was not healthcare reform. It was insurance reform. That's all it was. And so I was not a huge fan, particularly, of the insurance reform. How it affects my district is the following. If the Trump administration is successful in overturning the ACA, 60,000 people will immediately lose healthcare coverage.
Is that just in your district?
In my district.
Okay.
In my district. Another 250,000 will be affected by reductions in Medicaid and Medicare coverage. So it's pretty significant. We have 750,000 people in this district. So it is staggering. Now, with regard to where I stand on my position on healthcare, I had a son who was born with cystic fibrosis, which is a pre-existing condition. It is a fatal lung disease. And so again, as a young struggling college student, I had to deal with the problems with healthcare even back then. I can only imagine what it's like for today's young parents. Here's the situation. We can afford universal healthcare. Remember what I said about fiscal accountability. Health is a national security issue. If we had an airplane, for example, with a bioterrorist on it, that could be a problem nationwide. But it's a national security issue because unhealthy people are not productive people. So let's address that first thing. But second thing, universal health care would get rid of insurance carriers that add nothing to the overall quality or delivery of health care other than 30 to 40% of G&A overhead, and have the government pay private medical practitioners and private hospitals. So still we would have a vibrant private practice that doctors and hospitals could engage in. We would just cut out about 30 to 40% of inefficiency that's associated with healthcare. And also things like pre-existing conditions, lifetime caps, and bankruptcies, more importantly, would go away. And that's the other aspect of national security. If people are losing their houses, guess what? They're not that motivated to protect those interests that are really, really important to them. So these are things that we can do. They're affordable. And again, that's fundamental to my campaign.
So how would you go about funding a universal healthcare system?
I think it's a fabulous question. And I know that Bernie and others have talked about this. And Senate Bill 562 in California, which made it through the Senate but didn't make it through the Assembly, talks about how to fund it. There will be an incremental charge of around 2% per employee to their income tax, much like you would have in Social Security. In addition, there would be a surcharge above a certain level in businesses. So for example, a small business player wouldn't be heavily penalized. If anything, from a tax point of view, they might see a 0.5% or 1%. But corporations would end up paying slightly more. Now, here's the deal. Even if you paid a little more in income tax, you're going to save considerably on your outlay in terms of your healthcare coverage. So for example, my family, when I work in corporate America, would pay somewhere between $600 and $800 a month. Well, guess what? My 1 or 2% more is going to be considerably less than the $800 a month. So it is if we look at the cash flow aspect of it, and I'm a degreed economist, so sorry about that if I'm lulling your viewers.
It's fine. I just want to make sure that everybody can understand kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
So if we can maybe speak at a maybe not as advanced level.
Okay, so the point is there would be a slight increase in your income tax, offset by huge savings in your out-of-pocket expense to either your employer or direct if you buy insurance directly.
Okay, so that again makes total sense to me. Speaking of tax reform, I guess this would be a way to kind of reform the taxes a bit. You mentioned about having corporations pay a little bit more for their taxes. Do you know how much more corporations and maybe wealthier individuals would pay, and maybe just to help finance anything, not only Medicare for all, but finance infrastructure, for instance?
I think what we've seen, and you know, your viewers and our viewers can vet this, is that we've seen a huge shift in wealth as a result of tax policy changes starting with Ronald Reagan. And so, and over that course of that, now, I mean, it's been almost 40 years, this shift has put more burden on the lower income and middle class than ever before. And that's why everybody, even upper middle class people, are feeling a lot of pain. So those marginal tax rates at the upper end have gotten smaller, and so we're bearing more of the burden. So what I would suggest is it would probably result in, you know, again, I don't know the exact numbers, but probably 3 to 5% on the upper income to affect the overall funding of the government. Now, you know, when we've seen those slight increases in taxes, we saw this during the Clinton administration. Wealth grew considerably. All boats floated higher, and as a result, you know, the economic activity occurred. Now, the other aspect about taxes is that tax cuts, just for tax cuts, don't achieve anything other than that shift in wealth. If we were really serious about how we applied our fiscal policy and strategy at the federal level, and we can apply this at the state level as well, we would target tax cuts to drive a desired outcome. So for example, if a business wants to save on their corporate income tax, and we want better educated, better talented workforce, then maybe what we do is we give tax incentives based on how many of their employees get advanced education or retraining for our older workers, or those sorts of things. So we target tax incentives not just as a tax cut because it's quote unquote your money, but because it's strategic of value. We're in a global economy now, and we're competing with billions of other people on this planet. Many of those countries are doing just as I described. Heck, there's no reason why we can't do that kind of change here in this country. We just have the appetite for it.
Okay, so where was I going with this question? So speaking about kind of raising the taxes and things like that, how do you think that message would resonate in your particular district? Because as I understand, you're in a more conservative district, is that right?
I'm in a very conservative district. So I think the way, in order to be successful in this district, we're going to have to speak to Republicans in a way that they understand. And so is it just tax cuts, or is it the overall flow of opportunity that affects their business? So for example, a small business can achieve a nice, healthy tax rebate in exchange for offsetting some of the educational costs that our society needs to invest in those workers. Or we could incentivize certain businesses to come into our district, whether it's, you know, things that affect our you know, climate change, or improvements in infrastructure, or whatever it may be. We incentivize that with tax policy that benefits a small business. It might have some nominal increase in the small business cost, But ultimately, longer term, it grows their business opportunity. So I think that's the kind of conversation I would like to have. It's not simply saying, I cut taxes. In addition, by the way, and I think this is more important than taxes, small businesses are concerned about regulatory effects on their business. And so one of the things that I've been talking about on the campaign trail is to say, don't just tell me about how you want to cut regulation. Tell me specifically which regulation, because short of that, it's just a mamby-pamby crying act on your part. So in other words, you tell me exactly what you need to get lifted to make your business grow and thrive. If it's a protection afforded to protect somebody else because your business causes damage, well, then that regulation may not be lifted. But if it's just an onerous restriction on your business, let's get rid of it. So I believe that a populist candidate has to have that conversation, and I will absolutely go there.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and switch gears a little bit, and
Sure.
I'm going to go ahead and talk about kind of more on a national level, how maybe you would go about supporting marijuana legalization or not even supporting it. And also, we're going to pull it back to your district and say, I know that it's legal in California, but it's not obviously in other places. And that being the case, there's a lot of things that we could do. I don't understand what he's asking me, so I'm sorry. Don't do that.
Federally illegal.
Right, it is federally illegal in your district, so that there comes a lot of complications with that, as far as maybe some banking things that are some issues and things like that.
So as a Californian, obviously, I stand by what the voters of California adopted, and I have been the only candidate, I think, on the Democratic side that has publicly commented that I will support the legalization of marijuana nationwide. I'm befuddled why it's a Schedule I narcotic, and it shouldn't be. And I think that if I'm not mistaken, there are dozens of states that either have decriminalized the use of marijuana or have allowed it for medicinal use or recreational use. It's like any other substance that you might use. And by the way, if you're a libertarian, you should love this. If you're a Democrat, you should love this. And frankly, if you're a Republican, you should love the notion of having personal liberty. You have to have responsibility when you use any kind of substance, whether it's alcohol, marijuana, anything else for that matter. So I am a proponent of legalized marijuana. I will say that, but there also should be protections afforded to the public in general, that if you're driving a car or you're acting irresponsibly or taking care of kids, it's no different than alcohol abuse or anything else. So, it's just common sense. And if we're true about the American experience, then we should expand liberties, not constrain them. Obviously, there are some drugs that are very dangerous. If they weren't dangerous, they would be legal. So, those drugs we have to be very, very serious about. And everybody watching this knows what I'm talking about. Marijuana is not one of those drugs.
Right. I'm going to kind of switch gears again and actually ask about criminal justice reform and where you stand on that. If you are interested in maybe not having private prisons kind of run the show or anything along those lines. So where are you on this?
Every time we privatize something, and I know my conservative adversaries would like to believe it's more efficient and it's more effective. When there's a profit motivation, especially in the criminal justice system, it is not more efficient, it is not more effective, and we now have in excess of 2 million people incarcerated, oftentimes for nominal offenses like marijuana possession or the sale of marijuana and so on. And we've already addressed that. I think that if we are serious about incarceration and reform and providing education and services for those people that need to be, that were convicted and need to be in prison, it should be done at the state and federal levels, period. Outsourcing, let me take this even a step further. We spent $5 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan, and much of that expense was because we outsourced to federal systems integrators that are essentially mercenaries who made a tidy profit on that. And so then you also degrade the overall esprit de corps, where you have high-paid professional military personnel against our enlisted personnel at huge disparate income rates. So it's inefficient, it's ineffective, and if we're serious about this, the state and federal government can do a very, very good job at it. I've seen no evidence to suggest that I'm wrong on this. So, I could be shown otherwise, but I haven't seen it yet.
So this is going to actually lead me up into two directions that are very similar, but also very not similar. One is with immigration reform, because as we're noticing now, what's going on is that we've got nonviolent immigrants getting deported currently,
Right.
Or even getting basically housed by ICE in private prisons, essentially. How would you try to, I guess, alleviate that? Maybe make it non-existent if possible.
In the 50th district, this is particularly troubling because much of our district has agricultural zones that have hired and continue to use migrant workers, including many of which are there illegally. And I would argue that that they're being exploited by the owners of those farms and industries. However, here's what I think about immigration reform. We know it can be done. We know it works because it was done under Ronald Reagan. And that was, again, nearly 40 years ago. But what it requires is it would require the House and the Senate to agree on what immigration reform would mean. And when you round up families or tear apart families or take kids that were born here from their parents who were not born here, that is, in my opinion, completely un-American. They were, if we're about family values, then you keep families together. That's very, very simple to me. So having said that, what do you do about people that are here illegally? Perhaps what we should do is create a path to legalization that would constitute, there may be a path that includes public service, or obviously there's a rapid path to citizenship if you're in the military, even if you're a foreigner. So we could do that even with a civil bill of rights that would allow people to serve our country and then become citizens and fast track that.
So what do you think about the fact that we have people that have served in the military that are currently in ICE custody? So basically, the United States have retracted that contract basically with these immigrants that thought that they had a way or a path to citizenship, but then that got basically removed.
I think that ought to make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, because if there's one thing that all of us should revere, is that's commitment to the armed services and the safety of this country. And today, you mentioned they're not only in custody, but there have been over 300 military personnel deported, and many of which are living in Tijuana, right across the border from San Diego. That is completely unacceptable. It's unconscionable, and that has got to change immediately. And by the way, this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is an American value issue. And so I think I'm real clear on this one. They should become U.S. citizens immediately. If you serve defending this country, gosh darn it, you should be an American citizen, period.
Now, is there any way that you see anybody taking advantage of a system like that? For instance, people just come over here and maybe they don't serve. How do we make sure that we just aren't letting anybody into the country?
Well, so it's a very complex problem, right? Because you have some folks that believe that creating a physical barrier at the border will keep people out, and I believe that the barrier already exists, in the sense that there are basically weapons grade intelligence gathering tools that would allow us to contain the border electronically. Well, first you have to ask yourself, do we really have an interest in controlling the flow of illegal immigration in this country, when in fact there are people leaving this country faster than they're entering it? That's item number one. Item number two is that even if you can't solve the problem of people coming in, you still have to address getting people out of the shadows so they can be productive and contributing. They're already productive, but they have to be lawfully contributing members to our society. So it's a challenge and a problem. I don't think that exploiting illegal immigrants is advantageous to our society. And what I mean by that is I believe that there are businesses that take advantage of that status because they know they're powerless. And that gets us down to, the two Americas, where you have the rich and powerful and the poor and not powerful. And so, so we have to ask ourselves, we are a nation of immigrants. How are we going to deal with this? And how do we start today? And might you encourage people to come here? You might. It's possible. But you know what? We can't solve this problem. We just have to have the appetite to do it. And nobody wants to deal with it right now. Otherwise, it would have been solved.
Okay, so you mentioned that you're pretty much opposite in every way possible to your opponent. So what would you say to people that support your opponent or your opponent on immigration, and how would you counter your opponent's view on this?
Well, I think again, given my district has a high degree of, not a high degree, a large population density of migrant workers in the agricultural industry, the people in my district are going to have to pay attention to that, because if we were to deport all of those people, if ICE were to round them up tomorrow, their labor costs, their cost of doing business would go asymptotic. It would increase appreciably. So one of the things that myself and some of the folks working with me on this have discussed was actually asking for essentially a sanctuary status for economic reasons, and then again going more towards that public service route to citizenship to get the people out of the shadows and make them lawful. My adversary would just assume deport everybody and put a wall up. He's very much like President Trump, and that is, build the wall, the physical barrier, and all problems will be solved. But all problems will not be solved, and it will have a huge negative impact to the district.
So say that we get all these immigrants out of the shadows so that they can work maybe for a better wage. So how could you incentivize those farmers that may be taking advantage of these types of migrant workers and the fact that they're paying them low wages? Are they going to be willing to pay them at least minimum wage? How do you account for that cost?
Well, I think it's like this. If you're hiring illegal workers and you know it, you're breaking federal law. You're breaking state law. And in fact, I would argue, and this, we see this in the construction industry, and organized labor is concerned about this as well. When you have an illegal workforce that's being exploited, there's a competitive advantage by the cheater. And so the higher order question is, do you go after the cheater? If you want to set an example, then maybe you go after some of the companies that hire these people, these illegal workers or immigrants or whatever. They're people that don't have status here in the United States, and set some examples. I think the more positive approach, because I don't think you do well with a big baseball bat over an employer. I think the more positive approach is we allow these people to become U.S. citizens. They will have protections afforded to them, whether it's minimum wage or otherwise. And you know what? The American consumer will understand that we're dealing with the immigration issue. 12 to 20 million, depending on who you talk to. Now they're legal citizens. They're getting paid at normal wages. They're paying taxes into the system. They're getting some benefit from the system, but they're contributing. We'll pay a little bit more, and we won't have to deal with this sort of problem that's been artificially created because of the exploitation of an illegal workforce. And we have to stand up as Americans, and we have to do the right thing. That's how I believe, and that's what I would do, and that's what I would strive for.
Okay. So for someone who is, I guess, maybe in Tennessee or further east, how would you approach this issue to them? They're not necessarily dealing with illegal immigration. They just hear it's bad, it's negative. They're all.
A lot of states have illegal immigration problems. If you look at Texas, obviously, when I say further east, or even if you're talking about the Midwest, look at Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a huge population of migrant and illegal workers, whether they're mushrooms or farming. It's generally agricultural. And so every state has to deal with it. And there are consequences. The other aspect to this, I mean, every state ought to think about this. And this is why healthcare, we get back to healthcare as well, and back to the public services. Whether we like it or not, illegal immigration, if we don't deal with it, we're going to demand and tax our emergency rooms more, our healthcare delivery systems more, and ultimately it becomes yet a national security issue, as I keep harping on, in those states that don't even think they have illegal immigration issues. We just need to deal with it, and it's not impossible to deal with. It's just, we just have to have an appetite. And I think that's the other aspect that's driving me so hard here, is that I have seen over my lifetime this commitment to party over country. That we've got to fight that with every fiber of how we go to Congress. And this is why I said it's competency versus charisma. I don't care how good a speaker is about how they deliver the speech, but when you get to Washington, it is going to be a bloodfest, because these problems have to be solved. And right now, it seems like these candidates will go along to get along, and they align in their vertical silos. Well, maybe it's time for people to actually sit down. And again, in my case, I got nothing to prove. I've been a very successful businessman. I'm successful in my family life. I've been married almost 40 years. It's time to take it to those guys and figure out how to get country over party. It's high time we do that. And that's what I intend to do.
So speaking of kind of going into the public life, when you're a House representative, you're going to have to resolve kind of private issues with public issues.
Right.
And one of the major kind of conflict between the two that is going to be ever more present is that of net neutrality. So you've got these private providers that
Right.
don't want regulation from the government, which is a public sector. So where do you stand on net neutrality, and what do you think about consumers' protections?
So this is an area of particularly interest to me, because I worked with Al Gore on telecommunications legislation when he was a member on the Senate Telecommunications Subcommittee of Commerce. And again, not too much word salad, but it's complicated. And I also worked with Senator Danforth, who is the ranking senator from Missouri, who was the Republican. And we brought forward legislation to break the common carriers. And those are like the big, Verizon, AT&T, Time Warner, and so on, to break their stranglehold on programming, to allow access to programming for satellite dishes. And you say, well, what's the big deal? Well, if you're in rural Missouri or rural Tennessee, where Al Gore is from, you didn't share in the expansion of telecommunications because there was no cable there. So you had to do it with satellites, and they were strangleholding that. Well, this is no different in net neutrality. In net neutrality, because the FCC protected net neutrality a while ago, and what this is for some of your viewers is the free flow of information across the internet, where the common carriers, the AT&Ts, Verizons, Time Warners, and so on, do not pick winners or losers. The marketplace determines that based on the flow of information across the internet. And seriously, if you're a competitive, meritocracy-loving conservative, you should want net neutrality. You should want the opportunity for a small business to compete with a big business. Who's going to be the next Netflix, for example, or the next Hulu? It could be Pluto TV or somebody else. But with net neutrality gone, the common carriers could create an on-ramp to say, no, Pluto TV, you don't get to compete with Netflix. So clearly, I am a huge proponent of net neutrality. With regard to how it affects our personal, our personal freedoms and our privacy, my opponent, for $18,000 worth of campaign contributions, approved legislation that would allow these common carriers to sell off to the highest bidder your browsing activity. And that is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights. I did not grant access to my browsing or my personal interests to these common carriers. They are simply a conduit for information, no more, no less. And somebody in Congress somebody in the Senate needs to champion this issue. And I may be just that guy.
Sounds great. I'm so glad that you said that. I'm sure that a lot of our viewers at the Independent Press are going to absolutely agree with you 100% on this issue. I've got a couple more issues for you or at least a couple more questions that I'd like to ask and for the sake of time and things like that. And then I also want to get to just kind of any topic that you would like to discuss that you feel is kind of close to your heart. Beyond what maybe you've already discussed, or just maybe reiterating something for me. That being said, you mentioned that your the person that you are running against basically took money from the internet company basically to sell our internet browsing history. So how do you feel about campaign finances? And are you interested in maybe reforming campaign finance?
So I have long been a proponent of campaign finance reform. I took keen interest in McCain and Feingold when they introduced their legislation, and it was fought it was fought tooth and nail by their adversaries in the House, in the Senate, actually in the Senate in that case. Look, we spend billions of dollars, and we have the best, and in the words of Greg Palast, we have the best government money can buy, and that is not the American way. Now, there is a cost, obviously. There is a cost to media distribution, and the bulk of that money being spent is on television. And obviously the television and the common carriers, the same guys who want to control net neutrality, have an interest in maintaining their profits. And by the way, if net neutrality is eliminated, what makes us think that the common carriers aren't going to control who gets to put their message out on the internet, regardless of money? Right. It may get down to that. So that's a fundamental challenge. That's a fundamental assault on our representative form of government, period. I think that this election in this particular district will not be won by money at all. This will be run by grit, and it will be run with the people from Indivisible and Resist and TWW and guys like me. It's not like a PBS commercial, but guys like me that will go out and go door to door, and this will be guerrilla warfare. It will be we just had 4th of July, right? And 4th of July, if people were studies of history, they know that the revolution didn't start by everybody jumping on the bandwagon or being televised or eating hard-boiled eggs together. It started by people building coalitions, a table at a time, a beer at a time, a coffee at a time, slaughtering of a chicken at a time, whatever it was, that's what they did. And we're going to have to do that in this district to win, so that the Republicans understand that this guy named Glenn Jensen isn't their enemy. He's their champion for the American dream. The independents will say the same thing. And the Democrats will say the same thing. He's not very charismatic, but we like what he stands for. So, that's how I view this world. Campaigns, it's ridiculously expensive. And we have behaviors, where clearly if somebody's getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, or they sold off your browsing rights for $18,000 and they vote a certain way, that's no less than bribery. And you know what? I don't know about the rest of your viewers, but I take a personal offense knowing, and maybe I'm Pollyannish, but I take a personal offense knowing that these guys are taking a ton of money. They don't represent the interests of our district. And my adversary, by the way, took in millions of dollars of outside financing. For what? He knows for a fact, because of the density of Republicans, that he doesn't have to spend that much money in this state. So why is he getting that money? Why is he using it the way he is? And where is the bacon being brought back to the district? Because he's not doing it. He's nowhere to be found. He won't even show up at town hall meetings. So, that's not representation. That's exploitation.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And I think our viewers would agree with you on that one too. So if, say that you're lacking funds and you've got somebody that's really giving you, no pun here, a run for your money, how do you reach out to those people that watch television and are maybe deciding who they're going to vote for solely based on these ads? Do you try to run a more more personal campaign? How do you reach these folks?
Well, I mean, look, if we look at how Indivisible was established, they used a playbook basically from the Tea Party and said, this is how we're going to do it. And that involves a massive use of public awareness, challenging your member of commerce, being active, using social media. I'm a Twitter maniac right now, and I do that because of the speed of exchange and the way you can touch and the impressions you can leave. I think going door to door in a geographically large district like we have get out the vote people that do this kind of thing, but we're going to have to be smarter this time. In every campaign, everybody says that, but we're actually going to have to be smarter with point casting and targeting using more cost-efficient ways of doing things. But the other thing is Democrats are going to have to quit just going into friendly territory. Meaning, what did the Tea Party guys do? Did they just sit on their hands and say, well, I'm just going to talk to Republicans, or better yet, reactionaries? No, they went into non-traditional, non-friendly areas and said, look, here's my vision. That's a populist vision, right? And so when I characterize myself, I'm a populist with a lot of, if we think about my progressive values, they're embedded in it. But it has to be done in this fashion where we're going to go to the Chamber of Commerce, and we're going to go to the Lions Club, and we're going to go to the Kiwanis, and we're going to go here and there and so on, because that's how we're going to spread that message. Television's hit or miss, by the way. And a lot of people are leaving television for streaming. So I don't even know how again, all the reason why we have to protect net neutrality so we can protect our streaming rights, right? But, I think that's the only way we're going to win, frankly.
I can imagine that would be a lot of work for just one person to do. Are you looking for volunteers currently to help?
I can use as much help as anybody wants to give in this campaign. You're spot on. If most of your viewers probably have not ever run for office, particularly for Congress, and it takes a lot of energy. Right now, it's just me and a couple of creative folks, and it's been a lot of effort. So anybody who has an interest in what I have to say, and by the way, I'm very open to bidirectional dialogue. This is not just about me. This is about my district. This is about Congressional District 50. It's about change in our country. If there's one thing I want to leave this country in is better shape than I found it in. And so, I would welcome any support. And that can be as simple as providing creative input to the website, helping with position statements, helping me with speeches, or participating, or even being a talking head like I was for Edwards. That freed up a lot of, that just frees us up to hit more targets. And I think that's how it's going to have to run. Right now, we have a total of 6 candidates running on the Democratic ticket. So obviously, at some point, that's going to have to get pared down, and we're going to have some debates. But, I welcome that time. But in the meantime, any help that I can get is greatly appreciated.
Have you heard of the Justice Democrats by any chance?
I have not.
They actually are kind of helping people run campaigns.
Yep.
And what they do, from everything that you've told me, you would be a fantastic candidate for them. They are not interested in candidates that are taking corporate money, because they view that as corporate bribes that have become legalized.
Just as I said, yep.
Really into net neutrality and things like that. And I'm happy to give you their information.
It's fantastic.
Because they can kind of maybe help you, kind of direct you into a certain position. Because I can imagine that you're competing not only against the incumbent, but also 6 other potential candidates, and that is a lot to have to weed through. So I can help give you some of that information. But in the meantime, if people want to volunteer, where can they reach you at?
Well, it's really easy to reach me. You can go to my website, which is very complete. I talk about almost every issue that we've discussed this evening, and then some. And we add content on a weekly basis. And unlike most of the other people that are running, and their focus has been really to acquire money, my focus is really to acquire ideas and concepts and share and interact with people on how I view the world and how we can change this. That site is Vote Jensen, VOTEJENSEN, like the Danish spelling, votejensen.com. And if you want to see the issues, put /issues. It's really, really simple. If you want to get in touch with me directly, you can simply, you can get me by email at glenn@votejensen.com. Again, real tricky. Unlike my Republican adversary, I make myself open and available. So you can drop me an email. You can get me on Skype at, you guessed it, glenn@votejensen.com. Or you can call my campaign office phone number at 619-270-9494. So it's that easy. I'm one of the most accessible people you would know. And again, this is about us together making this happen. This is, I may have a lot of great ideas, but it's only going to happen if we get a lot of great people involved.
So I got a question from somebody as to where you stand on the Second Amendment.
So I am positive about all the amendments, and we may even want to touch on the Fourth in a second. I know I've hit on that, but with regard to the Second Amendment, and by the way, with all amendments, there are responsibilities. With rights, there are responsibilities. And again, I've talked about national security, fiscal accountability, but there are responsibilities with all rights. So as far as the Second Amendment is concerned, I have no issue with people owning guns at all, but there are responsibilities. The people should have proper training. There should be at least some sort of age restriction. I'm not sure I want to have somebody with a 50 caliber sniper weapon at age 12 using that weapon. There should be liability insurance. Remember, for every restriction, there is a protection. If something that you do damages my right to personal liberty and freedom, there should be a remedy for that. So there should be insurance. And then there should be full prosecution for anybody who is derelict in their responsibility. In other words, if they're mishandling weapons, they're not taking care of those weapons, that's a liability. It's like driving an automobile without, under the influence of alcohol or marijuana or whatever. There are responsibilities that go with rights. And by the way, if you're a Republican or Democrat or an independent, you should agree with me on this. It protects everybody. It protects your right to own a gun, but it also protects my right to be free of your irresponsibility. And that's exactly how I view the world on that.
All right, great. So there was, well, that was like his personal issue. So is there something that you would like to talk about in more detail, or maybe something that we haven't gotten to yet that you would really like to focus on for the next couple of minutes?
Well, one of the things I think that's really relevant to the Western United States, but this district in particular, is to have sufficient protection against wildfires, and they pose a clear and present danger to our district. We in two major fires out here, and I fought one of them, believe it or not, with garden hoses. We saved every house but one on our street. We lacked sufficient, federal, state, and local resources to fight the fires. We lost over 1 million acres in those two fires, billions of dollars of hard asset lost, farms, houses, livestock, and at least 16 people were killed in those fires. So as the congressman for this district, I would strike out to make sure that we had sufficient resources to get the necessary pumping for, at the federal level and the state level and local levels. A little outside of the congressional area, but it's really important to the members of my district. In addition, we didn't touch on cybersecurity, and again, I worry about national security, and I think one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest risks to our economy and our way of life in this country is internal cyber terrorist threats, and so we need to get serious about investing there. And so that's an area that I have particular interest in, given my time in telecommunications legislation, and I've also spent about 40 years of my life in the information technology business, including networking. So I have a real passion in this area. And then obviously, obviously we can do better in terms of how we're efficient at generating electricity and energy. And so my family is carbon footprint neutral. And so, let me see. Oh yeah, I got to make sure the mic's still on. So I believe that we can target incentives to shift our economy over to clean energy and promote jobs and manufacturing that achieve that desire. So whether or not we satisfy the climate change issue completely, well, that's part of it. Part of it is changing our behavior, and part of it is changing how we use land and how we align our infrastructure and our scarce resources. So again, I think at this abstract, and being in Congress is not a job for the timid. It's complex. There are lots of nuances, and hopefully some of your viewers can maybe understand that I understand the nuances. And so that's where I want to go with that.
Okay, so I know I mentioned kind of the last issue, but I immediately right off the website, I didn't really see anything about the LGBTQ community, the LGBTQ community, and it may be under the civil rights section. However, there's a lot of things coming about, like the bathroom bills that are cropping up in North Carolina and places like that. Texas, I think, just did some things like that. So where do you kind of stand on this?
So, and I think it is under the civil rights section because, look, I am absolutely amazed at this point in time in America that there's even a question about LGBTQ and the whole bathroom issue and all this other stuff. If somebody identifies with a different gender and or they are they have gone through gender transition, well, why shouldn't they use the bathroom of their identification? It makes no sense to me. And by the way, who's looking anyway? I mean, this is, I don't mean to be flippant about it, but it's like, guys, this is a human rights issue. Let's treat people with dignity and understand that how you enjoy your life is different than maybe how somebody else does. But these are fellow Americans. And so, again, I was happy that California led, obviously with some gay rights. We didn't lead the nation with gay rights, but some of the legislation that ultimately led to lawful marriage for gay Americans happened as a result of Proposition 8 in California. The Supreme Court ruled that you can't have two classes of people, the gay class and the straight class. And so therefore there's one class. Well, guess what? We're all Americans. Get over it. And so, so I'm absolutely going to push to make sure that civil rights are adhered to. And there are other civil rights that we have to deal with as well. This is a fight that we're going to have for the rest of our lives, because there are powerful factions that would love to take us back to a reactionary period. And liberty is not about reactionary. Liberty is about expanding freedom. And so, that's what I believe anyway.
So I think that this could be argued very easily to a lot of people, considering that this has been kind of hashed out in the Supreme Court, and that is pro-choice. And I don't happen to see that on the website again, and maybe I would like to see where you stand on this, and also kind of how you could maybe tell the people in your district where you stand on it, because I know it's conservative, right? So that it's not as kind of reactionary as you mentioned earlier.
Well, it is a conservative. I think there's more persuasion of a conservative valuation on that. Although, all of us value human life. There's no question about that. The bigger question is, at what point do we establish that does a fetus have a sovereign right as a human, as a normal civilian in the United States? The Supreme Court made their decision, and that is under constant review and constant challenge. At this point, I will defend the law. And when I say I will defend the law, and there are some distinguished Democrats in front of me, Jimmy Carter and obviously Bill Clinton and others, that have said, we want to make sure that abortion is legal and infrequent. And so if we're serious, so there are a couple of things that we have to think about here. If we're serious about reducing the number of abortions, then we have to do several things. We have to make an investment in education, and honest, authentic education about birth control and parenting and the roles and responsibilities of parents, and what that means. We have to be serious about aid to families with children. So you can't just protect the fetus and then, once they're born, well, tough tacos, we don't have, we have food insecurity and everything else that goes with that. And we have to be serious about healthcare. And until we get there, you know what? Let's do everything we can to keep it legal and infrequent. And, that's how I view it.
Okay. So I think that's all of my questions that I have. Anything else? Alrighty, so if you're okay, all right, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, Amanda, I just want to thank you and the team for this great opportunity. We covered a lot of ground here, and I do appreciate the time. I know I'm, one of the candidates here in a really, really tough district, and I want to encourage your viewers to reach out to me, and again, we would welcome their participation and also their feedback, because it's challenging being a candidate. It's challenging to make sure that you're very clear and articulate and authentic in your positions. And sometimes they don't always come out right in an interview like this. But I hope that, I've done my campaign proud, and I hope your viewers had get a much better feel for what we're trying to do out here.
All right, that sounds great. So I just want to again thank you for joining us this evening. I am Amanda, and I'm with the independentprogressive.com. So again, if anybody has additional questions that they'd like to add, please comment below. And of course, we'll send those questions on to you and see if you can answer them. And we'll also want to link all of the ways to get a hold of you in below, so that people can reach out to you as well.
That's fantastic.
So that being said, we just want to remind everybody that we are doing this in an effort to stay connected with our representatives and our potential representatives, because we are the people, and we need to make sure that we stay involved, stay connected, and stay excited. And that being said, again, I thank you for being here with me tonight, and that's all I have. And again, you can reach out to us at theindependentprogressive.com. So thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.